Hotel family, welcome back to Matthew Daniels TV. I am your host, the Chief Scribe, Matthew Daniels. First I want to apologize for not making a video in a while. I lost my father last month, so it has been a very turbulent time for me and my family. So you guys forgive me, but I'm going to get back to bringing you guys the information. All right, I'm going to get back to bringing you guys the information. I've had my time of grieving, and my father, the late great Reverend James E. Daniels, is an ancestor now. So how we talk about allowing the ancestors to speak and remembering the ancestors' names, my father has transitioned and my father has become an ancestor, and we are going to remember his name just like we remember all of the others. So this video, you guys see the title. Today we're going to be talking about fugitive slave William Grimes, the interesting life of fugitive slave William Grimes. Now, the book that we're going to be looking at today is too long for me to cover it all. So we're just going to be hitting some of the high points that he talked about and expounding upon them. And I'm going to have to break this down into a two-part session. There's no way that I'm going to be able to discuss all of the interesting things that happened in the life of William Grimes in one video. So this video is part one. So give me just a second, family. I'm going to check the audio. I'm going to make sure the audio and the visual is good. And I'm also going to make sure that my screen share is working properly. All right, so give me just a second. I'm going to make sure the screen share is working properly. I'm going to make sure the audio is working properly, and then we're going to get into the PowerPoint. So let me share the screen. Let me pull it up now. Give me just a second. Okay. All right. So I just started the screen share. Let me make sure that the screen share is up. The audio is good. Okay, it's on. Hotel Brooklyn Zoo. Like I just told everybody, man, I apologize for not, making a video in a while, but I lost my father last month. I know you follow my brother Core Figure, so I'm pretty sure you're aware of the situation. So I've just been, I've been dealing with some personal things. We all have to deal with personal things when we lose a loved one, when we lose a parent. But today, this is the book that we're going to be dealing with. We're going to be dealing with the life of William Grimes, the runaway slave. Now, my birthday was also last month, September 22nd. The ancestors have just blessed me to make it to 43 years old. And my wife bought me several books that I have been wanting to read. This is one of them. I've read through the entire book, and it was so profound. It was so profound that I understood and I knew that I needed to talk about some of this with you guys. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about William Grimes. Now, William Grimes was what was known as a mulatto, okay? His father was white, and his mother was a Negro. One interesting thing about him is that his mother was also a Negro. His mother's father was also white, and his mother's mother was also a Negro. One thing that you have to understand about what our ancestors went through during the time period of enslavement, there was a lot of rape, there was a lot of sexual assault, and there were a lot of white men making babies with Negro women. Okay. And so William Grimes is an interesting case. He was actually 3/4 white. He was more white than Negro, actually. But the way that the law was set up, the child took on the status of the mother. So if the mother of the child was enslaved, then the child was born enslaved. And so there were a lot of white men who were what we would call today absentee fathers, deadbeat fathers to their children that they were having with enslaved Negro women. That happened a lot. And the average person, if you do a genealogical search and you search your own history, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find someone in your genealogy that was mixed. Even me myself, when I searched all the way back and I found my ancestor that was enslaved, the oldest ancestor with the last name Daniels that I've uncovered, Thomas Daniels Sr., he was a mulatto, meaning his father was white and his mother was an enslaved Negro woman. So even in my own history, I've uncovered this. But it didn't matter that William Grimes was 3/4 white. He was still considered a slave because his mother was enslaved. And he was able to escape. He didn't purchase his freedom. No one purchased this freedom for him. He escaped. And while escaped, he ended up writing the book, Life of William Grimes, the Runaway Slave, because he needed money. To put it plainly, he needed money. What happened was, while on the run, he found a wife, Clarissa. He married her. He had children. He had a job. He was working odd jobs. He had a home. And so while he was on the run as a runaway slave in a free state, he encountered someone that knew him from his slave past. And long story short, he was forced to pay his previous slave owner in order to maintain his freedom. And if he didn't pay, he was going to be taken back into slavery. So he had to forfeit his house. He had to forfeit any property that he had acquired while he was free or on the run. And he had to forfeit any money that he had. And so in forfeiting everything that he had, he was suddenly broke. He needed money. And someone suggested that he write a narrative about his life, sell the book, and that way he can acquire money. Now, William Grimes is known as, his book is known as the first book written by a fugitive slave. Not saying that his book is the first slave narrative, but his book is considered to be the first slave narrative written by someone who was on the run when they wrote it and had it published. So we're going to break this down in 2 parts, and this is part 1. But this is the cover of the book that I particularly own. One of his descendants released a newer copy of it with a lot of footnotes, and those footnotes help you follow the story. So in addition to what I just said, we're going to look at a few things about William Grimes, and then we're going to get into the story. So it says William Grimes, born around 1784, and he passed away August 20th, 1865. Now, I want you guys to remember something. I want you guys to know how old this William Grimes story is. America became America in 1776, right? When we declared our independence from the British. So shortly after that, William Grimes was born. And he passed away in 1865. Now, 1865 was the year that the Civil War concluded. So he was alive. He was born shortly after the American Revolution, and he passed away at the end of the American Civil War. So he was right there for a lot of American history. And that's one thing I'm going to be pointing out as we go through this. Our ancestors met a lot of important people, right? Congressmen, senators, presidents, businessmen, and these slave narratives are so vital with respects to their historical relevance. Okay, this is one reason why I like to bring these things back, because People need to understand the historical value. So look what it says. William Grimes was an African-American barber and writer who authored what is considered the first narrative of a formerly enslaved American, Life of William Grimes, the Runaway Slave, published in 1825, with the second edition published in 1855, and another revised edition published by one of his descendants in 2008. Now, the edition published in 2008 is the edition that I currently own. Grimes escaped slavery by boarding a ship called Casket, which sailed from Savannah, Georgia to New York City. He then walked to Connecticut from New York to begin his life as a free man. So let's get into the book. Enough of the background information. Let's get into what he actually said. Now, before we get into what he actually said, I wanted to pull this quote out of the book, a quote that he made himself later on in the book, but I think it provides some much needed context to what we're going to read. William Grimes is quoted as saying in the book, "With but few remarks, I endeavor to give my readers but a faint representation of the hard treatment, ill usage, and horrid abuse the poor slave experiences while groaning under the yoke of bondage. That yoke, which is not easy, nor the burden light, but being placed in that situation to repine is useless. We must submit to our fate and bear up as well as we can under the cruel treatment of our despotic tyrants." This highlights the idea that a lot of us would like to think that if we were born during slavery times, we would have done something different than what our ancestors did. And I reject that idea. I believe that we would have done exactly what they did. And I appreciate what they did and how they did it. From the ones who were subservient, to the ones who led the revolts, to the ones who picked the cotton, to the ones who made the beds. I do not talk bad about any of our ancestors who had to endure slavery, because it is what they endured, what they went through, that gave us the opportunities that we have now, to have the jobs that we have, the bank accounts that we have, the internet access, the ability to live free. We gained that because of those very ancestors who were once enslaved. And they did exactly what they needed to do in that time period to get us to the point that we are in now. We have to start looking at our situation as a generational situation and not, separate ourselves from what our ancestors went through. Now, we're going to look at his actual book. William Grimes was born in 1784 and died in 1865, like we just went over. And his father was a man named Benjamin Grimes Jr. And his grandfather, although he doesn't say his grandfather's name, we have to assume his grandfather's name was Benjamin Grimes Sr., because you can only be a junior if you're named after your father, obviously. And his mother was an unnamed slave of a man named Dr. Stewart. So let's get into the book. He says, "I was born in the year 1784 in County of King, Georgia, Virginia, in a land boasting its freedom and under a government whose motto is liberty and equality. I was yet born a slave. My father, who we know as Benjamin Grimes Jr., was one of the most wealthy planters in Virginia. He had 4 sons, 2 by his wife, 1, myself, by a slave of Dr. Stewart, and another by his own servant maid. So his father had 1 child by a Negro woman who was his own slave. He had 1 child by a white man, a white slaver named Dr. Stewart, who was William Grimes, and he had 2 children by his wife. So he had 2 full white children, and he had 2 mulatto children. This was common. He says, in all the slave states, the children followed the condition of their mother, so that although in fact the son of Benjamin Grimes Jr., I was in law a bastard, enslaved, and owned by Dr. Stewart. My father was a wild sort of man and very much feared by all his neighbors. I recollect he shot a man by the name of Billy Hall through the arm, who came to my master's and stayed. He was, however, finally taken up and committed to Fredericksburg jail for shooting Mr. Gulliver, a gentleman of that county. So his daddy, Benjamin Grimes Jr., he played with that pistol. That's what we would call it now. He played with that pistol. He didn't mind firing off shots. And his father actually fought in the Revolutionary War. This is how far back William Grimes goes. His father was a Revolutionary War veteran who fought against the British to make America America in 1776, right? And so he says that his father was in the newspaper because he had shot some man in his arm, a man named Billy, but he also, after that, he killed the guy. He killed the guy with the last name Gulliver, who just passed by his yard one day. And he was walking through his property. His father, Benjamin Grimes Jr., asked him to get off the property. He didn't want to get off the property. He shot him dead. So he shot him dead, and that man Gulliver, he was a slave owner too. So his body servant, who was there with him at the time, ran to the plantation of Dr. Stewart, who was the owner of William Grimes, and told him what happened. So they rallied up the militia, they rallied up some armed men, and they went to go arrest Benjamin Grimes Jr. Benjamin Grimes Jr., he arms all of his slaves and basically like, you'll never take me alive. You'll never take me alive. And so there was a standoff between Benjamin Grimes Jr. and the military men that were coming to arrest him. And finally, some of his friends talked him into surrendering. They talked him into surrendering himself. So he surrendered himself. He went to jail, but he was eventually acquitted for the crime. They acquitted him and said that basically he was insane. He wasn't fit to stand trial, and he basically beat the case based off of that. But William Grimes, the fugitive slave, he tells us that he doesn't know if his father really beat it because he was insane or if because he came from a powerful family. We know how money and power and influence can affect the judicial system in America. And Benjamin Grimes Jr., his father was a very, very powerful and well-known man, the Benjamin Grimes Sr., who was the grandfather of William Grimes. Now, William Grimes didn't know much about his grandfather to actually put in his book for us to read, but he documented a nursery rhyme that was written about his grandfather, just highlighting how influential his grandfather was, right? A lot of times you may watch TikTok and you may see videos where people talk about the origins of nursery rhymes. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Rockabye baby in the treetop. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. These nursery rhymes that we sing to children, they have a lot of times historical contexts to them. In a lot of instances, those historical contexts are rather dark to be made in the nursery rhymes for children, but they have historical contexts to them. And William Grimes, his grandfather, had a poem written about him, which has now become a nursery rhyme. Some of you may have heard about it. Some of you may have not, but it's known. You can Google it. Now, the nursery rhyme is called Old Grimes. Old Grimes. If you never heard about it, Google it. It's going to pull up. Now, in the book that William Grimes wrote, he documents this nursery rhyme. Look what he says. I'm going to zoom in on this so you can see what I'm talking about. Look, he says, talking about his grandfather, been embalmed by the muses and lives in song. He being the very person on whom that famous song called Old Grimes was written. The lines are as follows. Now, he wrote this in like 1826. He wrote his book in like 1826. So this is how far back it goes. Now, I want you to look at some of the lyrics because I'm going somewhere with this. Look, he says, Old Grimes is dead, that good old man. We ne'er see him more. He used to wear a long black coat all buttoned down before. His heart was open as the day. His feelings all were true. His hair was some inclined to gray. He wore it in a queue. Whenever was heard the voice of pain, his breast with pity burned. The large round head upon his cane from ivory was turned. And so William Grimes documents the song that was written about his grandfather. Now, this song has become a nursery rhyme. And I'm going to show you guys something. When you Google the nursery rhyme Old Grimes, this is what's going to come up. It's going to tell you that the nursery rhyme Old Grimes was originally written by Albert Gorton Green. And they're going to say that he published a poem in the Providence Gazette on January 16, 1822, and it has since become a well-known nursery rhyme. So the Google searches accredit the song Old Grimes to a man named Albert Gorton Green, the song that's about the father of the fugitive slave who wrote the book that our video was about. And I haven't been able to uncover it completely, but I am beginning to believe that Albert Gorton Green stole this. He published it and took credit for something that he did not write. Why do I think that? Because in the book that was written in 1826 by the grandson of Old Grimes, he tells us who wrote the song. And guess what? He does not say that it was Albert Gorton Green. Look, let's go to the end of the poem written about Old Grimes that's documented in our book. Let's look at this last paragraph where it says, good people all. The last paragraph to the poem or the nursery rhyme. He says, good people all give cheerful thought to Grimes' memory, as doth his cousin Essex Short, who made this poetry. And so then William Grimes goes on to say, such, according to Essex Short, was the character of my grandfather, and if it is impartially given, I think the family has degenerated. One would think, though, Mr. Short admired Old Grimes' virtues more than he lamented his death. Brooklyn Zoo says, you are right, King A. That man took that poem. You see what I'm saying? So the brother Brooklyn Zoo must know something about this. Because, see, Google gives the credit to Albert Gorton Green. But the grandson who documents this, he tells us that it was a cousin of Old Grimes who wrote it. And if you Google it, every poem that you read or every version of this that you read is going to leave that last paragraph off where he says about his cousin Essex Short. It's going to leave that off because I believe Albert Gorton Green left it off. So right there, we're getting into the beginning of this and we're seeing how interesting this man's life was because his grandfather had a nursery rhyme written about him. Now, what I want to do now, we're just going to hit some of the pages. We're going to hit some of the highlights, and we're just going to talk about some of the things that William Grimes encountered. We're just going to talk about his interesting life. He had 10 slave masters during his life before he escaped to freedom. So he encountered a lot of different situations that we could talk about. That's why we have to break this down into 2 parts. So right here, we're going to talk about coffee, sabotage, and hard-up whippings. What am I talking about? At the age of 10 years old, William Grimes was sold off for the first time. And when he was sold off, his new master took him back home to his new plantation, his new home. And since he was young, and since he had no connection to the people on the new plantation that he was living at, his master and mistress, they made him what we generally call a house slave. He worked in the house. And one of his jobs was to make the coffee in the morning whenever they woke up and were ready to drink their coffee. And so there was a slave named Patty who lived on this plantation when William Grimes arrived. Now, Patty had several children on this plantation, and they were all working in the fields. And so she was jealous that William Grimes was working inside of the house. And so she sought to sabotage him, get him kicked out of the house and placed into the fields so that hopefully one of her own children could take his spot and take his job. So what she began to do is when no one was looking, she would steal medicine. She would put medicine in the coffee so that when the master, the mistress, and their guests would drink the coffee, they would taste the medicine and assume that William Grimes did it. They beat him, and by this means, Patty hoped to get him kicked out of the job of the house slave. So look what he says. Let's just go down. We don't need to read. We're not going to read all of it. Look, he said, let's look at the first paragraph first. He says, Dr. Stewart kept me until I was 10 years old. I used to ride behind the carriage to open gates and hold his horse. He was very fond of me and always treated me kindly. This made my old mistress, his wife, hate me. And when she caught me in the house, she would beat me until I could hardly stand. Young as I was then, I can yet remember her cruelty with emotions of indignation that almost drove me to curses. She is dead, thank God. And if I ever meet her again, I hope I shall know her. So he's telling us how the wife of his master hated him, and she would often beat him for nothing. So let's go down to the third paragraph where it says, after 2 days. It says, after 2 days travel on horseback, we arrived at my new master's plantation, which was called Mount Pelier. After residing there a few weeks, my mistress, finding me an honest servant boy, I was then entrusted with all the keys, which made some of the other servants jealous, who had, when in the situation which I held, pilfered from the stores entrusted to their care, for the purpose of giving to their acquaintances and relations, one in particular, my mistress's head servant and seamstress, who had as many children as my mistress and who were then working on the plantation. They fared much harder there than they would in my situation. She tried every art she could invent to set my master and mistress against me, as I had to make the coffee every morning in the nursery, where this servant, whose name was Patty, sat sewing. She would, when I was out, often take medicine from the cupboard and put it in the coffee, and her object in doing this was to compel me to go to the plantation and have one of her children in my place. But as I was a poor, friendless boy, without any connections or inducements to that. If I had been disposed, my mistress was determined to keep me in my present situation. What are they saying? He basically got the job because he was bought from another plantation. And what the slave master and his wife noticed on the plantation that he was bought and brought to, they had noticed that the people that were working in the house, the quote unquote house Negroes, they were stealing food and giving it to the other slaves who were working in the fields, their friends and their family. So they wanted William Grimes working in the house because he had no loyalties to anyone. He had no friends and no family on that particular plantation. So they were like, well, these other slaves are stealing to give it to their friends and family. This kid has no friends and family. We're going to let him work in the house around all of these goods. We're going to give him the keys because he's not going to steal and give it to any of these other people because he has no loyalty to them. And so the head servant of the wife of the house, the mistress of the house, was named Patty. And she felt like one of her own children, because she had several, she felt like one of her own children should be in the house and not this new Negro who was bought from another plantation. And so she would set him up and she would put medicine in the coffee, and he was whipped several times over this. She actually was successful because William Grimes was whipped so much over the coffee, and he was not even the one putting the medicine in it, that he eventually found a way to get out of working in the house. He basically asked, could he work in the fields? And he demanded to work in the fields because he didn't want to keep getting beat over something that he didn't do. Now, one method that he describes being whipped, one method was called being horsed up. Now, there were several diabolical ways in which our ancestors were punished on the plantation. One was called being horsed up. Now, what is horsed up? First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to what the ancestor says about it. Then we're going to talk about it a little bit. So what is being horsed up? I'm going to zoom in on this part to make sure you see exactly what we're reading. Let's see. I think, hold on just a second. Okay, yeah, there we go. So this is him being horsed up for the medicine in the coffee. So he says, Hawes, whom I shall hereafter mention, being then at the table, observed the same, adding that it tasted as if some medicine had been put in it. Upon this remark of the doctor, my mistress rose up from the table and went to the cupboard where the medicine was kept. And after examining said, here is where he has taken it from this morning. My master then rose up in anger and took me behind the ice house and whipped me severely in the following manner. First, he caused me to be what they call horsed up by being raised upon the shoulders of another slave, and the slave to confine my hands around his breast. In this situation, they gave me about 40 or 50 lashes. They whipped me until I had hardly any feeling in me. The crime was sufficiently deserving the punishment, but for a young boy who had tried and exerted himself to the utmost to give good satisfaction to his master, mistress, and all the family, never intending to injure any other servant, but rather participate in their wrongs and render assistance if could lawfully be done, and all for the malicious temper and disposition of this same Patty, it was too much for me to bear. So imagine, this is a kid, he's about 10 years old. I have a 9-year-old son right now. So being horsed up, what they would do sometimes is they would have another slave stand in front of you, the slave that was about to be whipped, and you would have to put your arms standing behind their back, put your arms around their neck, and they would hold your arms in front of their chest and like lean over and kind of like hoist you up off your feet. So you're dangling, hanging on the back, kind of like giving a piggyback ride, hanging on the back of somebody, and they hold you to where you can't move. And then they would take the whip and give you however many lashes or however many lashes with the whip that they endeavored to give you. So William Grimes, he talks about being horsed up in this manner several times, and in several ways. Now, in this particular story, where it says that there was a doctor there named Dr. Hawes, Hawes. This guy, I don't want to say famous because famous has a particular connotation to it, but he actually served as a member of Congress at one point. And this is why I titled this "The Interesting Life of the fugitive William Grimes," because when you read through a lot of these slave narratives, our ancestors have stories about a lot of influential people from the past. As we move forward, I'm going to show you that William Grimes even met a former president, Thomas Jefferson. They met prominent people. And so we have stories of these prominent people in American history from the perspective of the enslaved. And we get stories about them, stories with historical relevance inside of these slave narratives that we could not get anywhere else. Look what he says. And then we're going to prove it. The last paragraph, look, it says, Dr. Hawes, aforementioned, was present at the time I was whipped on account of the coffee and advised my master not to whip me anymore, as he thought I could not bear it much longer. He was my master's son-in-law and a member of Congress. So now he's telling us a personal story about a particular member of Congress. Now, this story that he's giving to the historical record, you're not going to get this story anywhere else. And of course, they're not going to repeat this type of a story. And if they do, they're not going to talk about it often because they're not going to want to paint their heroes in this type of a light. Although this particular doctor that was a member of Congress, he was a slave owner. He was a slaver. But in this instance, and in another instance as well, he suggested that they don't whip William Grimes, or they stop whipping William Grimes. Now, I can't speak to his character, but he was good at this moment because he told him, hey, man, look, stop whipping that dude. You done whipped him enough. He can't take much more. So he wasn't sadistic. He wasn't sadistic. But people will sometimes read these slave narratives and they'll see the names and the places and the titles of the people that they met, and they would think that this is just hogwash. Like, did you really meet somebody that was in Congress? Yes, he tells you his name. He tells you when this happened. He's giving you stories about them. This is true. This is a true historical account. And so what I did, I went and looked at that doctor, the Dr. Hawes. I looked him up. This is who he is right here. His real name, or his full name, is A.Let Hawes. That's his picture on the screen. He was a 19th century medical doctor. That's why he calls him doctor. Politician. He was a politician, a planter and slaveholder from Virginia. Right? Look, his career. Upon returning to Virginia, Hawes practiced medicine as well as bought several plantations in Culpeper County in what became Rappahannock County, Virginia, which he formed using enslaved labor. Go down a little further. Culpeper County voters elected Hawes as one of their 2 representatives in the Virginia House of Delegates. He won re-election several times, serving from 1802 to 1806, all alongside John Roberts. In 1810, voters in what was then Virginia's 9th Congressional District elected Hawes, who ran as a Democratic Republican to the United States of Representatives. And it goes on to, give his accolades. So yes, just like the ancestor William Grimes said, this doctor who practiced medicine was once a congressman. Right? Now, remember, William Grimes was born in 1784. Okay? He was born in 1784. And so he's telling you about, what he encountered throughout his life. This is one guy that he eventually met. And so this political American hero, this slaver, now we have some inside information on him. Our ancestors met a lot of quote unquote powerful people. Now let's move on. Let's look at a little more information. Hold on, give me just a second. I'm sorry. Before we continue, let's just end that screen share for a second. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, let's pull this up. Give me just a second, family. Sandra Askew says, Ampu, the real bookworm. Good afternoon. Thank you for all your hard work and sharing your research. No. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being interested in our ancestors. Now, I just shared a story with you guys, and it's good to see you. Now, I just shared a story with you guys about Patsy, the head servant for the mistress of the house, who put medicine in the coffee to get William Grimes beat. And that goes right along with the narrative that a lot of people push about the untrustworthy house Negro or house slave. Now, I understand why people say that. We got, the quote by Malcolm X, where he says you had 2 kinds of Negroes, the house Negro and the slave, the field Negro and the house Negro. We have movies like Django, which portrayed actor Samuel L. Jackson as Stephen. And so, yes, there were some house Negroes who were diabolical. I just showed you one passing. Set this 10-year-old boy up. But the more I read, the more I study, the more I learn, the more I don't really like the dichotomy between the field Negro and the house Negro, because you had a lot of house Negroes who were solid, and you had a lot of field Negroes who were untrustworthy. And all of our ancestors, being enslaved, they did the job that they were told to do. Everybody obeyed the master, right? So what I'm going to show you now, I'm going to show you a so-called field Negro doing what they accused the house Negroes of doing. Planter George snitches on William, and William runs away. William runs away to the mountain. And this is it's not funny, when we're looking at the horrors that our ancestors faced. But it, the story, it is funny in a way. Planter George, I say, Planter George was a boy. This dude, he was wild. What ends up happening is, like most of our enslaved ancestors, excuse me, I'm taking a drink of water. William wants to run away. So he's going to go to Planter George and tell Planter George about his plans to run away. And then this field Negro, Planter George, goes and snitches. He goes and tells the master, hey, man, William wants to run away. And so the overseer says that, hey, he going to beat William in the morning. So William, he ends up like, well, damn, I ain't got no choice but to run away now. I don't want to get beat. He ends up fleeing to the mountains, right? But give me a second. But the interesting thing is that it's a quote unquote field Negro that does it. Hold on, let me I ain't want to be drinking on camera. So I turn my camera off for a minute. Let me turn my camera back on. I'm gonna start trying to have my camera on a little bit more. So let me get my screen share back up. I'm finna show you guys Planter George. See, this is why the idea of the house Negro and the field Negro is more nuanced than people would make you believe. It's a little more nuanced. You had house Negroes that were solid, and you had field Negroes that were shaky. Look, he says, let's see, I want to get right to it. All right. In fact, I'm going to zoom in. I like y'all to be able to follow along if you have time. Right here. This hard treatment continued for some time. Excuse me. This hard treatment continuing for some time, I at length resolved to run away. I accordingly repaired to the cabin of a slave named Planter George and informed him that I intended to run away the next morning. I asked him for an old jacket and some meal, both of which he promised to give me. I then baked what meal I had for my supper and went to sleep. Old George immediately repaired to the house of the overseer and informed him of my intention to run away in the morning. Old Planter George couldn't wait to snitch. The field Negro. The overseer came directly to the cabin and sent in George to question me while he should listen without. So old George goes and snitches. The overseer comes back with Plantation George. He hides outside the cabin, sends Plantation George in. He's like, okay, get him to admit that he wants to run away while I'm listening so I can hear him. So George, it's just like wearing a wire. This was before wires was invented. Oh, Planter George was in there like an FBI informant. Like he was wearing a wire because he know the overseer is outside, and he started asking questions. Okay, so tell me again. You plan on running away, right? Have you talked to anybody else? Where are you going to go? Knowing the whole conversation is being recorded or is being overheard by the overseer outside. So William, just the luck of the draw, he's laying down, he's sleepy, he's being woken up. So he was like, man, I don't know, man. I might run off, I might not. Bro, let me go back to sleep. So he never fully confesses. And then finally, the overseer, tired of listening to the conversation, he just busts in, tells William, oh, you really want to run away? Well, I'm going to deal with you in the morning. Look, he says right here, the overseer then hollowed out, hey, you son of a bitch, you are going to run away, are you? I'll give it to you. Bring him out here. So they brought me out and horsed me upon the back of Planter George and whipped me until I could hardly stand. So then they horsed him up, like I told you earlier, on the back of Planet George, and they whipped him. Then the overseer says, and whipped me until I can hardly stand, and then told me if I did not run away, he would whip me 3 times a day and make me carry 3 rails to one all day. They was carrying rails because they were building a fence at the time. And so now he's like, okay, I just got beat. I just got whipped. He's telling me, okay, now you better run away in the morning, because if you don't run away in the morning, I'm going to whip you 3 times every day just for acting like you want to run away. So now what you going to do? Am I going to get whipped 3 times a day, or am I really going to run away? He ends up running away. So William Grimes ends up running away. He hides out in the mountains for a while. While hiding out in the mountains, of course, he starts getting hungry. He doesn't know what he's going to eat. So what he does, he goes to a nearby plantation where he knows the people there. He lies and says that his master sent him there to pick up a few things. He gets something to eat. He leaves. He goes back to the mountains. He stays in the mountains. He gets hungry again the next day, a couple of days later, and he decides to go back to that same plantation. But the problem was, after he went the first time, the plantation master went to the plantation of his master for another reason, spoke to them. They told him that William had ran away. And she was like, damn, William was just at my house asking for food. And so William's master tells him, hey, look, if he comes back, hold him until I get there. And sure enough, when William got hungry, he went back to that plantation trying to lie again. They held him, and they was like, "We're gonna hold you until your master comes." And so that just so happens it happened at nighttime. So they got another slave by the name of Daniel, I believe it was. They told Daniel to keep a watch on William until the morning, because the wife of the slave master, she was like, man, it's too late to be taking him back to his own plantation. Let's just spend the night, take him back over there in the morning. So William was going to stay the night being held captive on that plantation. Then he was going to be taken back home. But William, he begs and begs and begs a slave named Daniel to like give him his shoes, because it was wintertime, it was snowing, they had took his shoes from him, he didn't have shoes, and he was like, look, just give me some shoes so I can make it through the snow and let me run away. And Daniel was like, man, but if I let you go, they're gonna whoop me. But Daniel, being a real one, he ends up giving William one shoe. William took that one shoe, he ran off. Daniel chased him. Daniel couldn't catch him. He ran off back into hiding, but he was only able to survive for a little while, but he made it all the way back to his plantation. And he was like, if I can make it to my master and not get caught by the paddy rollers or the overseer, maybe my whipping won't be as severe. So he made it all the way home. And when he made it all the way home, he was in such an emaciated state from not eating. And the doctor was there again, the same Dr. Hall that I just told you was a member of Congress. He was there, and the doctor suggested, like, hey, he hasn't been eating. He's been living out there in the mountains, in the woods, on the run. He's young. Don't even whip him. If you whip him, he may die. So the doctor again, this guy stepped up to make sure that William didn't get whipped as severely as he could have gotten whipped for escaping. But this scenario, again, it just goes to show we need to rethink the field Negro versus the house Negro dichotomy or scenario. The house Negro isn't as bad as what they make us think, and the field Negro isn't as good as they make us think. This Planet George was a field Negro, and he snitched. So let's move forward. Now we're going to go to a part in the story that I thought This was very, very, very interesting. This is the first time I read a story like this. The very first time. And it boggled my mind about just how diabolical slavery really was. And see, the thing about it, if you don't read the slave narratives, you're not getting the truth about slavery. Well, you may be getting the truth, but you're missing out on so much. A historian today, a researcher today cannot give you the real depth of the depravity of slavery like someone who was enslaved. You see? These slave narratives should be required reading for anyone who wants to study slavery. And that's just the truth. That's just the truth, man, because you have to see slavery from the perspective of the enslaved to understand it. So at this section of the book, what we're going to look at is William Grimes, is forced to whip a slave for not whipping him hard enough. You heard me right. You heard me right. At one point in William Grimes' life, he had earned himself a whipping with the lash. And so we all know that a lot of times the slave master will make another slave, another Negro, whip the slave. They would actually enforce the punishment. And so, you know, sometimes you think in your mind like, okay, well, I have to listen to my master. So if I was back in those times and they made me whip my fellow slave, my fellow Negro, I just wouldn't hit him as hard to show them some type of mercy. So what we're going to see now is a slave tried to show William mercy. And so what the slave master did, they made William whip that slave for showing mercy. Then they made that slave whip William again properly. This is crazy. This is crazy. Look, check this out. He says, I want to get right to it. Where it says, at one time, my master, having caused an oven to be built in the yard for the purpose of baking bread for the Negroes, I went there and finding it not quite dry, made impressions with my fingers, such as letters, etc. on it, while the mortar was green on the outside. Now, because William Grimes was 3/4 white, because he was more white than Negro, he didn't get educated. Like, he didn't go to school, he didn't get formal learning, but he was allowed to learn things and know things that the average slave didn't know. The Willie Lynch letter is a fraud. It's not real. It was written by a black man decades later after slavery had ended. The Willie Lynch is no person named Willie Lynch. It's a made-up name. But the idea of pitting one slave against the other, or there being a caste system of sorts amongst slaves, is real. Now, William Grimes was white. He looked white. I'm going to show you him being white, passing late. He pretended to be a white man successfully over and over and over and over and over. Now, I have nieces and nephews who are mixed, half black, half white, that look white. So I get what white passing is. I have nieces and nephews. You look at them, you're going to think they're white. They have to tell you they have a black parent. They have to tell you that for you to know. Now, I know because they're the children of my brothers. But being born by a white man of a prominent family, William Grimes was afforded some level of education. And he even says himself that had his father not went to jail for murdering that man, like I told you about earlier, his father would have saw to it that he was free, because he had a brother that was a mulatto just like him that he sent to school to be educated. And I believe that brother, and William Grimes believed that brother eventually was freed by his father. But his brother, his mulatto brother, the mother was a servant of his father, Benjamin Grimes Jr. So he had control, legal control of him to free him or not. Whereas William Grimes was the slave of a woman who was, his William Grimes was the son of a slave to someone other than his father, meaning his father had sex with another man's slave and got her pregnant. And while his father was locked up for killing a man for stepping on his property, he was sold off. But he says in his own narrative that he has no doubt his father would have freed him if given the chance. So when you see William Grimes talking about he was writing in the wet cement, he knew some letters. So he says, Gabriel, one of the servants, a son of old Valentine, was ordered to strip my shirt up and whip me. The word severely has been so many times used, it needs no repetition. My master stood by to see the thing well executed, and as he thought he did not be severe enough, he ordered me to strip him and perform the same ceremony, which I did. So they saw that William wrote in the wet mortar, the wet cement. They told Gabriel, whip him for writing in the wet mortar. When the master saw that Gabriel wasn't severe enough, he didn't whip him hard enough, they told William to strip Gabriel and whip Gabriel. He says, he then ordered Gabriel to try to whip me harder than he did before. Then Gabriel knew what the old man meant, to wit, to whip me as severely as lay in his power, which he effected on the second trial, exerting all his strength and agility to the utmost to make me suffer, only to please his master. This being so often the case, the Negro drivers, and indeed the slaves, show much less humanity in punishment than the masters themselves. So I want you to imagine that. Imagine you being enslaved and you doing something wrong. And so they tell another Negro slave to whip you. This other Negro slave, trying to have compassion on you, whips you, but he doesn't, he doesn't just try to rip the skin. He doesn't just beat you unmercifully. So the master says, okay, you want to show him mercy? Then tells you who are being shown the mercy, strip the one who is showing you mercy and whip them as hard as you can for not whipping you hard enough. And so you beat them for not beating you. Man, that's crazy. And so then after you beat them for not beating you, they get the whip again and they're told, now beat him again, and you beat him right. And so then that person beats you and they exert their full force. And so when you look into the historical record as recorded by our ancestors who were enslaved, a lot of times the Negroes whipped harder than the white people would whip, because they would in turn be whipped for not whipping hard enough. That is just, that's like a psychological mind F-U-C-K. That's crazy. But I appreciate the ancestor documenting that story so we could see it. Now back to the interesting life of William Grimes. Now I told you about the congressman that he met, but he also met a United States president. He didn't meet him while he was president, but he met him. So this slide is called William Meets President Thomas Jefferson. First, we're going to go to what the ancestor said. Then we're going to go to something about who Thomas Jefferson was. And we're going to talk about it. Look what he says. Look how historically relevant this is. We have in our possession the life story of a man who met a United States president. Look. After now he's changed hands several times before this point. Remember, he had 10 different owners, so he experienced a lot. Look what he says. After remaining there a couple of months, he informed an acquaintance with a young lady who he afterwards married, talking about his new owner. After he had been married 1 month and 4 days, his wife died. Soon after that, we returned to his father's plantation in Montpelier. After remaining there for a few days, we went on to Frederickstown in Maryland, where we stayed a short time and returned again to his father's. After a short stay there, we went to Monticello. Remember that? Monticello. And resided at the house of Thomas Jefferson, formerly President of the United States, for a few weeks. So here he documents in his narrative what he went to the house of the former president, President Thomas Jefferson. And see, this is one thing you got to understand. Prior to the Civil War, the majority of American presidents owned slaves, even George Washington, the first United States president. Now, Thomas Jefferson, it's either him or Adams, but I believe it's him, owned more slaves than any other American president. And what's crazy about that is one of the things that Thomas Jefferson is known for is being a founding father. And he wrote the majority of the Declaration of Independence. So Thomas Jefferson wrote the majority of what we know to be the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Who wrote that? Who wrote that? It was Thomas Jefferson, who wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. Thomas Jefferson, the slaver, the U.S. president who owned more slaves than any other president, is the president who penned the words, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And when we talk about Monticello, where Thomas Jefferson lived, it was a slave plantation. When you talk about George Washington living at Mount Vernon, the one of the major tourist attractions in the United States, Mount Vernon is a slave plantation, y'all. Monticello plantation is on the back of your nickel. When you look at the back of a nickel and you see that building and it says Monticello, that's the big house. That's the big house. That's a slave plantation. And Thomas Jefferson had a lot of babies with his slaves. There is a whole community of black people, African Americans right now, who are descendants of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson fell in love with one of his slaves. He loved her. He loved her and had baby after baby after baby after baby with her. Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence. These are facts that nobody can get away from. And William Grimes, we're talking about the interesting life of William Grimes. William Grimes spent 3 weeks, according to the historical record, at Monticello. So I'm saying he met Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, he saw the man. He may not have shook his hand and talked to him, but damn it, he met Thomas Jefferson. Look, Monticello was the primary residence and plantation. I'm gonna zoom in because I'm not gonna play with nobody telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. Look, Monticello. Come on, Wiki. Kill him, Wiki. Monticello was the primary residence and plantation. Monticello was the primary residence and plantation. You have a plantation on the back of your nickel of Thomas Jefferson, a founding father, author of the Declaration of Independence, and the third president of the United States. Jefferson began designing Monticello after inheriting land from his father at the age of 14. Located just outside Charlottesville, Virginia, in the Piedmont region, the plantation was originally 5,000 acres, which Jefferson, using the forced labor of enslaved black people for extensive cultivation of tobacco and mixing crops, later shifting from tobacco cultivation to wheat in response to changing markets. Look at that last sentence. The United States nickel has featured a depiction of Monticello on its reverse every year since 1938, with the exception of 2004 to 2005. There go Monticello right there, the slave plantation. There go the nickel. Look at it. Look at it. You mean to tell me you can't tell if that's the same damn place? Look at it. That's the same damn place. You have a slave plantation on your money. Monticello was a slave plantation. Listen, multiple men wrote the Declaration of Independence. The one who wrote the most words on the Declaration of Independence was Thomas Jefferson. He wrote more of the Declaration of Independence than anybody else. And he owned slaves. But what was the Declaration of Independence? The Declaration of Independence, they were declaring independence from King George in Britain. I say we because I'm an American. My roots go back to here. Before that, Africa, yes. But damn it, I have every right to this state, just like anybody else who immigrated here, just like Thomas goddamn Jefferson. So we declared independence from Britain. King George. I don't remember exactly which number because there was several of them, but King George, we know it was King George. They declared independence from Britain. And so they wrote out the Declaration of Independence because they had to declare that, hey, we are no longer subjected to the king in Britain. They made their own constitution. This is our constitution. And the 13 colonies became the United States of America. But Thomas Jefferson was a slaver, and William Grimes met him. Now, let's move forward a little bit. Now we're going to talk about hoodoo, fortune tellers, and witches. Remember, virtually, according to our ancestors, virtually every large plantation had a hoodoo doctor on it. William Grimes, he tells us in his own words that he often would go to the fortune teller and pay to have his fortune read. And he talks about a woman named Frankie, a slave named Frankie, who he called a witch. So let's read what he says, and then we're going to, like we always do, we're going to talk about it. Let's see where we want to start. First, I'm going to show you about what he says the fortune tellers. Look, he says, he would never allow me to, At such times, I would often go to the fortune teller, and by paying her 25 cents, she would tell me what she said my fortune would be. She told me I should eventually get away, but that it would be attended with a great deal of trouble. And truly, I experienced a vast deal of trouble before I could get away. So there was always prophets, prophetesses, fortune tellers amongst our people. Frederick Douglass was told that he would one day be free. William Brown was told that he would one day be free. And a lot of our ancestors went to these fortune tellers. Now, these fortune tellers are people who practiced hoodoo. Hoodoo is the religion, the spiritual system that our ancestors created on the plantation. Nobody can take that away from us. I will state to my readers some facts relative to the treatment I received from him and others, his new slave owner, during the time I lived there. He had an old black female slave whom he called Frankie. I always believed her to be a witch. Circumstances to prove this I shall hereafter state. So there was a slave named Frankie on a new plantation that he was sold to. And almost every time he was sold for around $500. But why did he think Frankie was a witch? Have you ever heard people talk about sleep paralysis? Or they may say the devil was riding you. Such a witch was riding you. There is a state that some people go through when they're laying in their bed where you feel as if you're awake, like you can open your eyes, you can see the room that you are in, you can hear what's going on around you, but you can't speak and you can't move. Nowadays, they call it sleep paralysis. In several ancient times and in ancient cultures, they say the devil is riding you or a witch is riding you. You feel as if something is pressing down on your chest, holding you in place, and you can't move. You can't move a toe, and you can't speak, but you can see and you can hear. That's happened to me at least 2 times in my life. And I'm not going to go into those details because this isn't about me. But William Grimes is saying that he believed Frankie, the slave Frankie, was a witch, and he believed that she was riding him. Now let's look at how he describes it. And some of you may have experienced this before. But wait, well, before I go into that, first I want to tell you why he thought Frankie was riding him. His master had misplaced his umbrella. And so Frankie saw someone walking through the yard that had a umbrella that looked like the master's. And so when their slave master was asking where was his umbrella, Frankie said, I saw William with it. The master confronts William. William says, I don't know what she's talking about. I didn't have no umbrella. The master doesn't believe him. He whips him. So now William is upset with Frankie, and he's like, the reason why she lied to you, she probably was drunk. And so the master said, how could she be drunk? I don't allow any of my slaves to have liquor. Conjure Chris 9 says, peace, brother. Thank you for tapping in. And so William Grimes, he snitches, and he says, look in her trunk. See if you find some rum. She has rum that she's been stealing, and she's probably drunk. That's probably why she told you that. So the master searches Frankie's things, finds rum that Frankie stole, and so Frankie is in trouble. Now Frankie has it out for William Grimes because William Grimes gave her up. So look, that's why he says, on this same account, she, Frankie, appeared to be determined to kill me by some means or other because he told on her about her rum. So now let's get into the witch riding him. He says, I slept in the same room with her under the kitchen. My blankets were on the floor. She had a straw bed on a bedstead about 4 paces from mine. My master slept directly over my head. I have heretofore stated that I was convinced that this creature was a witch and would turn herself into almost any different shape she chose. I have at different times of the night felt a singular sensation, such as people generally call the nightmare. Now that word nightmare, we use it now. We say nightmare. I had a nightmare. I had a nightmare. If you dream about something that scares you. But it comes from a 2-part word, nightmare, that was first forged into nightmare. He says, I would feel her coming towards me and endeavoring to make a noise, which I could do quite plainly at first. But the nearer she approached me, the more faintly I would cry out. I called to her, Aunt Frankie, as plain as I could, until she got upon me and began to exercise her enchantments on me. I was then entirely speechless, making a noise like one apparently choking or strangling. My master had often heard me make this noise in the night and had called to me to know what was the matter, but as long as she remained there, I could not answer. She would then leave me to go to her own bed. And so he just goes on to talk about how he felt like Frankie was riding him as a witch, that she could take the form of anything that she wanted in the night. And he describes something that is very similar to what we now today call sleep paralysis, or the devil riding you. Okay, the devil riding you. You see? Look, matter of fact, let me just show you this one part so you know it's the exact same thing. The last sentence. After my master had called to her a number of times, Frankie, what ails Theo? Theo is what they call William. A lot of times when an individual went to another plantation, they would just rename you. They'll just give you another name, one that they wanted to call you. Look, he says, a name I went by there couldn't short the name Theodore. So they changed his name from William to Theodore. She answered, Hag ride him, sir. So even Frankie understood. She was talking, a hag is riding him. A witch is riding him. The Satan is riding him. A demon is riding him. They have been talking about these things for centuries. Another supernatural occurrence that happened in the life of William Grimes. He was sold to yet another plantation, And while there, he was given a bed inside of the house. It was in an upstairs compartment. And the bed that he was allowed to sleep in formerly belonged to someone who had died in that bed. And so William is told to sleep in his bed. He proceeds to lay in his bed and tries to go to sleep. And he says that he sees a ghostly pair of eyes looking down at him that he eventually interprets to be the ghostly eyes of the recently deceased servant or slave who slept there previous to him, saying and basically looking at him saying that he didn't have any right to live there. So this is another supernatural occurrence that he talks about. And he actually brings this up later on in his work. And he says that like he knows that people isn't going to believe what he's saying, but it's 100% true. So let's just read what he said about this occurrence. Right here. He says, when I first went there, on account of my being unwell, my mistress, Miss Collett, did not like to have me sleep in the house, and so gave me a room up over the carriage house to sleep in. And where he's talking about him being unwell, he pretended to be sick, and he stopped eating for a considerable amount of days so that his previous master would think that he was sick and sell him off, thinking that he was going to die and he was going to lose money. But he was faking being sick so that he could be sold off. So he said, in this room, there was a bedstead or bunk made of boards. I understood by some of the servants that a man lately died there in a fit. In the course of the day, I laid myself down on the bedstead with a blanket to rest. Not being able to be about, as a very little exercise overcame me. After lying there about an hour, I was looking very steady up towards the roof of the building, when to my great horror and surprise, I could plainly perceive a large, bright, sparkling pair of eyes intently fixed on me, staring me full in the face. It instantly occurred to me that the bedstead I was then lying on belonged to the man who had died there, and that I, not having any liberty to use it, was doing wrong, and that this was a token for me to leave it. I accordingly took my blanket, spread it on the floor, and slept on that. And again, he goes on and on in later chapters saying that this really happened to him. Now, I personally believe that ghosts are real. I know a lot of you believe that ghosts are real. So, there's no way to scientifically verify if he saw a ghostly pair of eyes. But we're just looking at some of the accounts in the narrative of William Grimes. Oh, yeah. Whoa. Now, I think this is going to be the last thing I'm going to talk about in part one. Yeah, this is going to be the last thing I talk about in part one, but this is very interesting. William pretends to be a white man and helps a free Negro. Now, remember what I told you. William Grimes is 3 parts white. His daddy is white. His mother is white and black, so he's more white than black. But since his mother was a slave, he was a slave. And he actually looked white. And he would often pretend to be a white man to escape the paddy rollers and the slave catchers. And in one instance that I'm going to show you guys, William Grimes was a slave. A free Negro comes to his house, and this free Negro is afraid to walk home because when I say free Negro, I mean a Negro that's not a slave. All of our ancestors weren't enslaved. This free Negro is afraid to walk home at night because he knows that the slave catchers and the paddy rollers will still treat him harshly because he's a Negro. Even though he's free, he's going to get the same treatment. So this free Negro needs William, a slave, to help him get home at night because William looks white. It was so many slaves that look white. It's crazy. But look, check out what he says. And now they call this, it's like they'll say white passing. They look white. And he goes into this because he eventually found religion. William Grimes found religion. And he would often go to these meetings, these religious meetings, and learn about the Word of God, learn about the Bible. And he would be out late. And so he would leave these meetings and go home. And so one day his master was like, man, hey, where the hell you been? Where are you spending all this time? And he was like, oh, I was at the meetings. And his master was like, how can you be out late all these nights and the patty rollers don't get you? Why don't they get you? Why don't they beat you for being out after dark? And William Grimes didn't want to tell him the truth, but the truth was they don't get him because they think he's a white man. That's why they don't do nothing to him. They think he's a white man. But he didn't say that. Look, that's why, look, at the end of this, he says, he would be very well pleased, his master, the top sentence. He would be very well pleased to have the guard, the patty rollers, the slave catchers, take me up and take me to jail in order to punish me for attending meeting. But the guard never attempted to meddle with me. They always took me to be a white man. But now now what he said prior to that is he didn't tell his master that, like, they don't beat me because they think I'm white. But you just have to think about the psychology of it. You have slaves that look white, 3/4 white. They daddy white, they mama white and black. They look white. But because of their mother was enslaved, they're enslaved. It's like people talk about deadbeat dads, right? Absentee fathers right now. But you had so many people during the time of slavery, so many white men having babies that not only did they not take care of those children, not only did they refuse to claim those children, not only did they not feed those children, buy those children clothes, give those children an education, look after those children, they allowed those children to be slaves. Imagine that right now. Imagine allowing your child to be a slave. They tell people don't want to pay child support. Not only did you not want to pay child support, you let your child be a slave, bro. This child that they look white. And imagine the confusion. This white person could be a slave. They look white for all intents and purposes. They might be white. But that's just a whole nother discussion for another day. But look, he says, I have frequently walked the streets of Savannah in an evening and being pretty well dressed, generally having on a decent suit of clothes and having a light complexion, being at least 3 parts white. On meeting the guard, I would walk as bold as I knew how and as much like a gentleman. They would always give me the wall, meaning they would stand out the way and let them walk down the street. One time in particular, while walking home late in the evening, I saw 2 or 3 of them together. I was afraid, but summoned all my resolution and marched directly towards them, not turning to the right hand nor the left, until I came up to them. They at first did not notice me, being engaged in conversation. I continued on, head up, walked past them, and happening to brush one of them a little in passing, they immediately turned off the walk. One of them spoke and said, we ask your pardon, sir. So just visually looking at him, he bumped up against one of them and they, pardon me, excuse me, sir. Stepped to the side and let him walk by. But that same guy, just by looking at him, they apologized when he brushed up against them. Had they known he was a slave, they were like, oh, you a slave, you a Negro. They would have beat him mercilessly. You feel me? But look at this story that he tells, and then we're going to wrap this up. At another time, I deceived them in the following manner, the patty rollers. One, or he called them the guard. It's the same thing. One evening, a colored man from Richmond, Virginia, called on me while sitting in the kitchen and told me he had lately been waiting on my master, Doc Philip Thornton of Richmond, and had taken him from there to his father's country seat at Montpelier in Culpeper County in a carriage with 4 horses, but was at present waiting on a gentleman from Richmond, then in town, who lodged at Colonel Sherman's Tavern some distance from my master's. He told me his name was William Patterson. He was a free man and was hired by people occasionally to drive their horses. So we have a free Negro named William Patterson at the house of the slave William Grimes. He had heard of me while at Dr. Thornton's, and by inquiring of Major Lewis, a black man, who was a great groom in Savannah, he found where I lived. He stayed with me, taking something to drink, and smoked a cigar, my master knowing nothing of it, until about 11 o'clock, when he wanted to return to his lodgings. I told him the guard were all out at their post, and it would be dangerous for him to attempt it alone. But if he would consent to walk behind me in the capacity of a servant, to all appearances, I would accompany him home. And I had no doubt, but I could deceive the watch as I had done before. He readily consented to this, and I put on my best suit, took a rattan in my hand, a cane. He walked behind me and continued on until we reached the tavern, where we found about 15 or 20 of the guard seated on the steps of the door. He trembled, but I walked on directly when they rose up to make room for me to enter and him to follow. So we have a slave pretending to be the master of a free Negro to safely walk him home. Because the slave looked white and the free Negro looked like a Negro. So a free Negro needing a slave Negro to walk him home because he looked white. Just think about this after the video go off. I opened the door and went in. He closed it. After he had followed me as a servant through the streets and made the watch believe it, when we were alone by ourselves, he flourished his hands and snapped his fingers a great number of times, saying, "Well done. Well done for you. I will tell this when I get home to Virginia. I should not dare to have undertaken so desperate a thing." Now, I want you to think about that environment for several centuries. How will that manifest from generation to generation, even in the colorisms that show itself in the black community? Being light-skinned is being better. Being light-skinned, you get more opportunities. Being light-skinned, you get treated differently. Colorism is deeply embedded within the psyche of the Negro race. But it goes back to a time in slavery where even a light-skinned slave would be treated better than a dark-skinned free Negro. I'm going to say it one more time. A light-skinned slave would be treated better than a dark-skinned Negro. That's the origin of colorisms. That's the origin of from white is right to light is better than dark. That's where the idea was incubated of the light skin versus dark skin. Light skin being better than dark skin. Light skin getting more opportunities than dark skin. Because that was a reality. It's not something made up in the minds of people. It was a reality during the time of slavery. And we see it so plainly laid out in the life of William Grimes. Right? He looked white. He was a slave. He got more respect than a dark-skinned free Negro. So, like I told you guys, it would take too long for me to go over the entire book. It would even take too long for me to go over the highlights in the book in one video. So we're going to do this in two parts. This is part one. I'm going to come back with part two, hopefully tomorrow. And we're going to look at some more interesting parts of the life of fugitive slave William Grimes. So we want to say the name of our ancestor. We want to remember the name of our ancestor. And let me end the screen share as we wrap this up. So this has been Fugitive Slave. I put Fugitive Save. I need to, hold on, let me change that name real quick. I just noticed that. I spelled the title wrong. I put Fugitive Save William Grimes. Interesting life. All right, there we go. So Fugitive Slave William Grimes, Interesting Life, part 1 of 2. I'm going to come back hopefully tomorrow with the rest of it. And we're going to culminate with me telling you guys how he eventually escaped to freedom. So I want to thank you guys for tapping in. Sorry that it has been so long since I made a video. I really do apologize for that. But again, I lost my father last month on September the 13th. So I just been dealing with a lot. Conjure Chris says, thanks, bro. I appreciate your episodes you did on Philadelphia Hoodoo. Conjuring Queen, you opened a new chapter for us here in Philadelphia in the Northern Hoodoo practitioners. Man, thank you, bro. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for tapping in. The health is connecting the history of the Free African Society in Congo Square here in Philadelphia. Man, you want to know something? I did some research on that Congo Square. You're right. That Congo Square has some real serious history where our ancestors would go, they would play their drums, they would practice their traditions, they would honor their ancestors, they would dance, they would play music, and they were allowed to do that. One thing about it, slavery, and I'm pretty sorry to hear that. I appreciate it, bro. Yeah, I lost my father, man. But the treatment of our ancestors in America went through stages. And everybody's experience wasn't the same, like we just showed. William Grimes was a slave. He ran into a Negro, a colored man that wasn't a slave. So, you know, it's history. We need to study history. But I'm going to come back with part 2, hopefully tomorrow. I want to thank you guys for tapping in. This is your brother, Matthew Daniels, a.k.a. I'm Pooh, a.k.a. The Chosen Few, a.k.a. The Real Bookworm. I'm not a bookworm world. I'm the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. And for all of you out there, may your name live on forever. May your memory never die. Hotel, I'm out.